Welcome, Bulldog fans and all bowl season fans, to Nissan Stadium in Nashville. Steve, glad you could make it this morning, and a nice sunshiny day, a little bit cool, but the action will heat up this afternoon at 3 o'clock when Mississippi State takes on Louisville in a bowl game, which is really more important than most bowl games usually get, certainly for Joe Moorhead's program at this stage of the career. And he admitted yesterday this is a big game where they need to win this one.
Oh, there's no doubt this one will determine what kind of season ultimately this is measured against. I mean, this is going to be a losing season or a winning season. I tell you, David, you mentioned the weather. We've got a great football day, but this turf is a little bit soggy, a little bit loose track after the rains they've had this week on into really around 2 this morning. Kind of similar to what we saw last year at the Outback Bowl. Not quite as bad as what we saw with the Belk Bowl in 15. Probably comparable to 17's Jacksonville Gator Bowl as well, but this is not anything the Bulldogs should be unfamiliar with. But I don't know if that favors Mississippi State or Louisville, but I got to think whoever can establish the ground game might be happy you've got a little bit of a loose track.
Yes, it did rain here yesterday, and the field is cut very short. You see, the Titans were not in town, so the field's in good shape as far as that goes. All logos laid down nicely, but you can look at the grass and see some patches in there where the footing could be a little iffy. But I tend to think State with a power-type running game should have some sort of advantage. And yes, Tommy Stevens is maybe not the type runner that Schrader was, but I want to point out something, Steve. Did a little research. In November, once Stevens kind of adapted his running style to be a little more aggressive, a little more quick on the trigger, he had something like 2/3 of his rushing yards in just those 3 games. So I'm not worried about State's running game being called any differently than it was depending on who the quarterback is.
Well, I think the main thing with Tommy is, the rib injury. That everybody says he's close to 100%. Will that be a factor in his willingness to tuck it and go? Because as you mentioned, David, against Arkansas, he was quite the weapon in the running game, and I think it really caught Arkansas by surprise. There were so many called quarterback runs, not to mention the fact that I think they were expecting Garrett Schrader to start, and Tommy Stevens comes out, and before they know it, it's 14-0. Ultimately, the game decided very, very early. But you're right, David. Mississippi State's got to come out and get Colin Hill going. Nick Gibson's a guy, too, that runs well between the tackles. And this Louisville defense is very susceptible to the run, especially the inside run.
Of course, the offensive line is healthy. That's always something good to have at this stage of a season. Colin Hill is full speed and wants to make a great impression, going obviously for the single-season rushing record. You mentioned Nick Gibson. And I think the receivers were playing better as the season went on. And, of course, Stevens, probably the better percentage passer. Of course, he's maybe a little rusty now, having missed the last game of the season and running with number 2s much of bowl camp. He's only been number 1s now for about a week or so. Still, you feel like State has the chance to put a balanced offense out there in the field for one of the few times this season.
Yeah, I think so, David, and I think this Louisville defense has been susceptible to the passing game and the running game. This is not a great defense, but on the offensive side of the football, very, very explosive. Got a couple of guys that are really kind of SEC caliber players, and Hawkins at running back and Atwell at wide receiver, and they're going to run a lot of concepts Mississippi State fans are familiar with. A lot of zone read stuff, a lot of design quarterback runs. I can't say it's a mirror image of the Joe Moorhead offense, but it's very, very similar to what Dan Mullen ran at Mississippi State and out Florida.
Of course, we had our press conferences yesterday with both head coaches, and Coach Joe Moorhead and then Bob Shoup as defensive coordinator. Oh, how we missed talking to him during the regular season. He was great yesterday. Bulldogs, again, they're not healthy on the defensive side of the field, and they've lost 2 starters in Cam Dantzler and Brian Cole, who both opted not to participate in bowl camp or the bowl game. So State's going to start Jerrion Jones and Martin Emerson at the cornerback positions. And now at safety, Marcus Murphy will start. Jacarius Landrew should be healthy and ready to start. And then you can swing some guys in there. Fred Peters is a guy expected to play in that nickel position. But Shoup and Moorhead both mentioned, more so Shoup, they'll probably go with a 3 linebacker type set today, which means Willie Gay, who again is available along with Lee Autry. When in 3 linebackers, you can do more things because he's the linebacker who best could play that sort of star position that we know so well.
Well, not to mention, too, David, you mentioned some of the shortages depth-wise in the secondary. State's going to be without 4 of their opening day starters in the secondary, with only Jacarius Landrews really starting every game this year. Murray Smitherman lost for the year to injury. Brian Cole, like you mentioned, not to play in the ball game. C.J. Morgan injured for the year. So this State secondary is going to be really challenged today. But I think you're right, David. I think you've got to put your best players on the field, and also to kind of protect that lack of depth in the secondary. Willie Gay is a guy that can be a run stopper and get out into pass coverage and really give those tight ends a real challenge. And that's one of the things, too, watching some film of Louisville. They have a true blocking tight end they never throw the football to, and they have a receiving tight end they rarely ever run behind. That's something to really watch as we get into the game today.
Of course, we would comment about Willie being ready to hit somebody, but that's maybe kind of in poor taste at the moment. But we'll move on to that. Of course, Jaden Crumity doubtful for today's game, but still you have the starting line of Autry and I would suppose with Fabian Lovett, and then Dathan Pickering, freshman All-SEC, ready rotating. So at this stage, Shoop has much of the defense put together as he can. Steve, simply this comes down to, can you make a few stops, and can your offense score, and can you avoid the special teams mistake, and quite possibly create some things, because it's a windy day here on the field. We don't know what 3 o'clock conditions will quite be like, but you don't want this game to come down to a field goal. You want to establish your ground game. You want to eat clock, and you want to put touchdowns on the board. I know I'm being very simplistic, but it's a bowl game. That's what this is about.
Well, these teams are very similar, David. I mean, if you look at their records and statistically, they're very similar. Both of them have been an adventure in special teams this year. I mean, Louisville's had some nightmarish games on special teams, as Bulldogs have as well. It's going to be about making the big mistake, David. I think whoever makes the first mistake early will probably be chasing the game the rest of the afternoon. And so State's got to avoid that and find a way to get a quick start. As we know, David, State's undefeated when they win the first quarter.
And, of course, we had to make our predictions before we knew for sure what the quarterback position was. But now that we know what we know and have an idea who's available, your prediction today?
I think State wins the ball game. But I think now Louisville's going to score a little bit, And to be fair, we expected Ole Miss to score maybe a little more than they did. But, I think because of that, those concepts that Shoop put in to kind of slow down the quarterback run and John Rice Plumlee, some of that kind of carries over. And so I think State wins this ball game. I think you get just enough stops. I think the physicality of the State linebackers could be a real difference.
And I'm going to predict a Bulldog win by 2 points, not by a missed point after, but by 2 points, because I think the Bulldogs will establish their ground game, eat up enough clock, keep control of it, stay away from mistake. And I think Tommy Stevens wants to make a good show in his last game, as does Kylan Hill. So the offense, I think, is going to have to win this game. I think they're certainly capable of doing it. But in a few hours, we'll find out. Kickoff at 3 o'clock Central Time here on Nissan Field. We'll, of course, be having our post-game wrap-up as well as Mississippi State concludes this 2019 season. And we can start looking ahead to the 2020 season. We'll talk about aftermath of the game, what's happening as far as possible changes, coaching staff, other things going on in the program. But, Steve, we have one more game day. Let's enjoy it.
Absolutely, David. And this is the day that we didn't feel it was guaranteed about halfway through the year. The Bulldogs had to go 3-1 in the month of November, retain the golden egg, and now here we are. So now it's kind of your reward for the season. Let's get a W, get some momentum heading into 2020.
So for our crew here and back in Starkville for the Gene Space 24/7 site, Steve Robertson, this is David Murray.